Morning. I'm excited to talk about all the cool and fun ways we can use our threat models. I'm sure we've learned about how to create threat models, but there is a, art and science of how to use it to run an AppSec program. And I'm just going to share stories from 3 places that I've worked at, and one from a large enterprise side, big national bank, a scale-up, a fast-moving startup, and an earlier stage startup, and how we implemented threat-centric AppSec to use our threat models to their full potential. So we just went through the agenda.
There should be a microphone up there, they said.
Yeah, perfect. All right, sounds good. Can you all hear me? Perfect. So the premise of my talk is secure software starts with threat modeling. We're all in the same room, I think here, kind of agree with this. The question is why and how. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to start by talking about vulnerability-centric AppSec and why it doesn't scale in today's world. In some organizations, vulnerability management takes up to 80% of total AppSec team. What that means is that everything else, including threat modeling, enablement, tool creation, design reviews, all that good stuff can only take up to 20%. That's not exactly how we want our AppSec programs to run. We want them to be scalable. Another part of the problem is there are way too many CVEs, and only a small fraction of them are exploitable. And so, in my view, we don't have a data problem, we have a decision problem. If we are just running our AppSec programs based on CVSS, we are not making the critical AppSec decisions properly. We need a better way to make AppSec decisions. And I'm going to argue why threat-centric approach is that better alternative. On a macro level, something else is also changing. I'm sure you're dealing with that in your day-to-day work as well, but the speed of development is really, really increasing. When I used to be at Capital One mid-2010s, at best case scenario, our cycle was almost 3 weeks. Even for the smallest changes, the cycle from ideation to production would take at least 3 weeks. These days, teams start ideating in the morning, the prototype is in dev or staging by end of the day, and it's in production by the end of the week. That is massively putting a scaling issue on AppSec teams. And so I'm going to be talking about my experience with that. And speaking of journey, since the theme of the conference is journey, quickly about my personal journey. I started my career as an AI and machine learning engineer. I worked at Capital One in mid-2010s as a tech lead building fraud models. 2018, I started my first security company focusing on SaaS data security. Ran that for 4 years, sold the company to CoinList. At CoinList, I built critical fintech solutions for Web3. In 2014, decided to leave and build again. Before beginning, I made I set a goal for myself to talk to 60 practitioners in 60 days. I hit that goal and kept going. I've been talking to more than 200 of them, many of you in the past couple of days as well. And that led me to start DevArmor, which is a secure by design platform. We are building for the AI native era, the new tech stack. Back to different ways to run AppSec programs. So we talked about vulnerability-centric. The idea is that instead of focusing on a never-ending cycle of detecting, ticketing, and then patching, which kind of runs in a never-ending cycle, the paradigm shift is to focus on starting by threat modeling, identify attack paths, identify controls, then build and prioritize based on the controls and the attacks and the real threats that we identified during threat modeling, enforce them in code, CI, and runtime, and at the end of the cycle, use tests and scanners to identify and catch whatever fell through the cracks through that process, and use that to learn and improve our threat model. This is a cycle that, by repeating itself, is going to improve at every cycle. We have a learning feedback loop that goes into it, instead of chasing vulnerabilities that just keep increasing and growing. An example of that, again, Capital One back in mid-2010s, I was part of Capital One Labs. Our mandate was to innovate quickly, to stay ahead of the fintech wave that was happening during those years. So we had super fast-moving cycles at the labs section. I had an amazing security engineer counterpart who was eager to do threat modeling. The issue was that we had way too many services to do threat model for every single one of them. So what we decided to do instead was, let's just pick up a few, 1, 2, 3 maybe critical flows. Movement of funds or online account creation. Build a few lightweight threat models for them, build those controls, and then the most critical part was to enforce them in a way that makes the happy path and the secure path the easy one for developers. Create the standards, create tests, CI checks within the developers' workflows in order to implement and enforce those controls throughout the process. Just to give you an example of one of those cases. On the left here, you see an attacker's path, for example. You're just looking at account takeover as an example here. The attacker can first get in using credential stuffing, reusing leaked passwords. If we have weak authentication, token verification, they can get in. If we don't use robust session management, they can stay, eventually move funds, game over. Now, I should go back. If you run scanners, the signals that we may get from different scanners are going to look something like this. SAST might be complaining about a token verification issue. I'm not clicking on anything, sorry. SAST might be complaining about a token signature check in authentication. We look at DAST results, it's going to be probably flagging something around weak rate limits. CSPA might say the payments endpoint is talking to the cloud too freely. Bug bounty might come back, the report might come back and say sessions are not invalidated after password reset. All of these individually, when we look at them, they might feel unrelated. When we look at it in the context of a threat, they tell a cohesive story, account takeover. So that's how we can tie everything together and prioritize our AppSec program in that case. So the actions that we took was we create a parent task, Jira, ServiceNow, whatever you're using. Then for each fix, we would create a child task, relate that to and map that to the parent task, to the parent threat. And then when we push those to engineers' work streams, they understand the context. They understand this is happening in the context of a wider set of activities and actions that we are taking. And again, the important part is to automate this as much as possible for developers in their IDE, in GitHub, in Jira, wherever they're designing, implementing, testing, deploying the application. Why did it work? Threats add the missing context. Developers want to have the context. As AppSec engineers, we want to be able to tell a story when we are prioritizing, when we are talking to folks managing up and managing down. We want to be able to tell a story in order to get traction behind our programs. Now, there's a mental shift associated with this. If you want to move from severity scores to context-driven AppSec, the mentality should be the base is threat model and business context. This is where we define what truly matters. What are the crown jewels of the applications? What attack paths are most likely? What are the trust boundaries that we need to protect? After that, we talk about design time controls and requirements. This is where we bake security into the application. At this stage, it's still cheap to fix things or right the ship. After that, it's going to be much, much more expensive to retrofit. The third layer is guardrails and automation. This is where we scale controls and policies throughout code reviews, automated testing and scanning, and so on. Through automated code reviews, automated pushing of the standards into the developer IDEs, CI, and so on and so forth. At the top, at the last, scanning and testing. The message that I want to get across is scanning and testing has a very critical space and place in this whole chain, but it should be used to catch anything that fell through the cracks by the time the code is written. The more that we can move forward, the easier, faster, cheaper it is to make fixes. My second stop, I told you about, I'm going to talk about 3 different places that we implemented threat-centric AppSec. The first one was Capital One, big national bank, enterprise level. Second one, CoinList, super fast moving scale up. By the time I joined CoinList, it was already in operation for 8 years. So we had a backlog and history of vulnerabilities. So we couldn't just start by secure by design and start from scratch. We had a backlog to work on. So we had to basically work on 2 competing or complementing strategies, top-down and bottom-up. Here's how we looked at the top-down. We had, again, a backlog of vulnerabilities. The way to start looking at them, we thought of that as a funnel. So we start with threat analysis. Look at scanner results, bug bounty. By then, we had a robust bug bounty program. We had some reports coming in. So first thing we did was we mapped each of those to what assets they are, to basically the threats, what assets they are touching, what trust boundaries they are attacking. How could someone actually take advantage of this potential vulnerability? So that puts everything into the context. Without this step, everything seems critical, but nothing gets done. So you want to start always with this step. Second step was reachability analysis. So we look at, what actually can get reached. We look at the reachability, but also what controls and guardrails we already had in place. So we could, again, start to trim down the funnel, if you will. Next, we put in some auto remediation. This was done through some templates, PR checks. By that time, even GitHub Copilot was in place, so we experimented with auto remediation. I think auto remediation has moved much faster since then too. So there's this place for AI at that side of and that stage in the development. And eventually, whatever was left over, we created a small, clear engineering tasks, but again, tie them back to the threats. And that's how we got buy-in from the engineers to actually work on the issues that we had. The bottom-up, I call this the spotlight model because this is a way to look at the sea of vulnerabilities with a targeted approach. So you start again with the goals. What are our crown jewels? What are the attacker's goals? What could be they after? What are the critical flows, such as authentication, payments, transfer of funds, and so on and so forth? From there, we come back into the flows. We look at the flows, and then we use the scanners and tests and telemetry to identify how those flows can actually get compromised. Eventually, once we understand and prioritize what vulnerabilities we want to address, we looked at how we could make this change on an architectural layer and design layer. If there was a problem with, for example, a token verification, we fix the authentication flow, or we fix the authentication standards that we have, as opposed to just fixing vulnerability at a time. And again, this was where AI helped us do a lot of that vulnerability management and remediation as well. So the theme of the conference is journey, and that was a lot of text. Just have a question for you. What do you think dinosaurs, chickens, and threat models have in common?
So we get at the beginning.
Any guesses? Okay. One more guess?
Evolution. Dinosaurs. Evolution.
Yep. The most energy efficient ones survive. So if you have a super big threat model, it's super hard to move around to keep it alive. You need to trim it down to the asset size and the company size that you have. Which takes me to the third place that I want to talk to you about. The company I'm in right now. At DevArmor, we are a much smaller but much faster moving team. So we have to right size the threat models. Petra is in the room, so I'm a little self-conscious to talk about that because she's the architect behind all of this at DevArmor, but I'll just try my best. Basically, we are looking at the threat models in 4 different tiers. Not everything needs a 2 weeks workshop to do a threat model. Not everything needs a few hours of spending time and trying to look at all the hypothetical tasks. We always look at, is this a high critical item? Is this a business critical item or not? If it is, sure, let's do a threat model. Let's spend an hour, 2 hours on really going deep into doing a full-on threat model. If it's still high or medium criticality, then we could look at a smaller scale, a micro model as we speak. 30 minutes, 40 minutes tops. We usually spend some time during our product meetings or regular meetings to do that. We don't even need to have a separate meeting to talk about those items. For items that are moderate criticality, but they're still externally facing, we could do a design review. Again, it's a structured way to review the design of the application, but it doesn't have to happen as a completely separate activity. It happens in the context of talking about the product. And then there are internal tools that don't necessarily have any high criticality. We basically look at those as PR reviews or basically keeping those within the context of the development itself. We use some techniques also to make this integrated within the CI/CD and developer workflows. So I'm just going to talk about a few of those. First one is triage findings by threats. This again is one of the most important ones. If we have one takeaway from this session, is triage findings not by CVSS but by threats. We start with vulnerabilities and findings, and then we map them to CAPIC. At this stage, this mapping would help us deduplicate a lot of results and findings. At this point, we can group them by those CAPIC attack vectors. Then we put them into the scenario. What assets these vulnerabilities could put at risk? What are the trust boundaries that are affected by these issues? Who would actually be interested in abusing this vulnerability, for example? And again, this gives us a better understanding of is this a now problem, later problem, next, at what level, and how do we prioritize that? Eventually, we make a decision, and the decision is easy as we either fix right now, we defer to a later stage, or we put it in the backlog. We don't have to worry about it right now. The net effect is faster triage, fewer duplicates, and decisions that are tied to real attack stories, and not just vulnerability IDs or CVSS. So again, just one tactic and one workflow that we use. I talked about how CVSS and severity scores are not the right way to prioritize and bring context. So this is an alternative way to that. For every vulnerability that we dig deep, we ask these 5 questions. What's the blast radius? How far can the attacker go if they exploit this vulnerability? Let me talk about reachability. Is this really reachable from external, from the internet or not? Do we have enough guardrails in place that even if the vulnerability gets exploited, we are going to stop the attacker or not? Third question is, does this sit on a critical path, such as authentication, that is a choke point, an access point, such as IAM, that could have potential ripple effects or not? Fourth, do we have compensating controls already in place or not? So we always talk about existing controls. And eventually, obviously, data sensitivity. This brings enough context to the vulnerability that then we can make a decision. So simple questionnaire, you can include this in your vulnerability reports, in your PRs, or design documents as well. And then lastly, we try to integrate this into the dev workflow as much as possible. And so that means, again, like I said, adding micro prompts to Jira and PRs. Just ask the questions. Usually developers know this even sometimes better than the application and the security team, because they are in the ins and outs of the code. What data and permissions are changing? Do I need to update the threat model because of this PR, because of this proposed change? What could go wrong? The 4 questions, the 4 famous questions, right? And again, we try to use as much tooling as possible to automate this process. Different teams have different workflows, so you want to cater to those different workflows for moving from all the way from ideation to deployment. I've seen teams starting from PRD, going to tech specs, to architectural review, issue trackers such as ServiceNow, Jira, so on and so forth. For at each stage, we kind of talk about it in different terms. They all come down to the same thing. Let's look at the context, let's look at the threats, let's look at the risks, and then decide what actions we're going to take. And then the end result is continuous threat modeling that flows with delivery and scales with your code, as opposed to chasing vulnerabilities. And I want to leave you with these 3 key takeaways. First, we talked about start from threats, not alerts. That's how we can stay ahead of our AppSec program and not chasing. Scale by putting controls into code and CI. Automate as much as possible with the standards, with testing and so on. And eventually right size and simplify to make it sustainable. I talked about 3 different scales. They tell the same story. We want to start from the threats, and we want to automate that as much as possible. That's it. Thank you.
All right, folks, I've got the microphone back here. I'll go ahead and give to the folks that have questions. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left.
Hey, this is a great point, and it's the first time I see somebody talking about threat, not vulnerability, so thank you for that. Why did you choose CABEC, that is the commission project, versus CWE or full CWE mapping to the right threats?
That's a good question, and by the way, thank you for also everything that you've published on threat-centric. I think you and Nizar also were inspiration for everything, so I hope that was in line with some of those learnings. Really, it comes down to how you want to manage your program and your preferences. CAPEC made sense for us because at the scale and at the level that we are looking at the vulnerabilities, that helped us refine and trim down that funnel as fast as possible. So it comes down to that. I don't think there is a right or wrong way to do it, but at the end of the day, it's about deduplicating as many of the vulnerabilities as possible, as fast as possible. I think at the end of the day, different teams are going to have different preferences. So with your tooling, with your processes, you should be able to give them that customization or that flexibility to choose what they want to choose. But the goal at the end of the day is deduplication. That was the main goal. Petra, do you want to add anything to that?
CAPEC is not dead.
It's not that.
No. There is plans to revive it. It's died, but we're going to bring it back up.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Looking forward for that.
Yes.
Thanks, man.
Can you go back to the slides of the tiers? You have like 4 tiers. My question is, when you say higher, the criticality of what? Of the projects, or specifically?
Business and data. Thank you for mentioning that. Or impact, yes. So really it comes down to if this gets abused, who's going to get hurt, and is it going to hurt the business, the end user, the customer? What's the business and economic impact? Depends on the data sensitivity. Are we storing PII here? Is this a HIPAA compliant application or not?
So you already talked about specific threats. It's not like you have 10,000 projects. Which one you're going to focus on?
Absolutely, yes. It's always starts with the business context.
Okay.
Who's involved in figuring out which tier?
So we are a small team, and at this level, the conversation happens literally within our talking about product, right? So we need to create a new integration. So at this point, we are talking about token management. The next conversation is about between security, engineering team, and myself involved. So it could be an easy conversation that you have during your product roadmap sync, or it could be a very detailed conversation that we sometimes say, you know what, this is a critical topic, let's set a time aside for doing that. But it's always, we are lucky to, again, have from day one a security expert on the team, so we had that capability. But again, on the engineering side, we have that kind of skill set in place. So it happens between engineering, business, and product. It just happens that we had the capability within the team, but we are a small team. So
I just wanted to address your question also, where it says highest criticality, medium, and high. He's using the ASVS there, so those levels 1, 2, and 3 are already determined on what the risk would be.
Right, but that's an existing threat. You already identify the threat and then you use it.
It's a flaw.
It's a flaw. Yeah, you already identified. It's not a project. It's not a product.
yeah.
That's all.
Thank you
Oh,
for the
I see what you're
presentation.
saying.
I want to clarify for myself to understand more. When you are referring to vulnerability,
Yes.
are you talking application flow vulnerabilities or just about vulnerability management? So there are different.
How do you define the difference? Just so I
You
can.
have the flow like your sequence of like session flow, right?
Sure.
That's the vulnerabilities. inherited by design versus using third-party session management library that has vulnerabilities that you maybe cannot fix because you are using third-party libraries, right?
That's correct.
So at some point, if you are bringing your product to the customers, public customers, you probably have commitment to fix all vulnerabilities, your logic plus third-party vulnerabilities. But it seems that this is more, this process is more centric for fixing your application vulnerabilities, logic-wise. Those third-party. Because then prioritization will be a little bit different, right?
That's a great question. What I presented was mostly focused around what we are building, but SCA or doing vulnerability management for third-party applications shouldn't be different from this as well. If you see a critical vulnerability in a third-party tool or library that you're using, you still need to ask the same question: are we even using that? Is that in our path or not?
You can have Spring Boot framework as part of your application. There could be billions of vulnerabilities that are not impacting you because you don't have clear path, or you are not calling those Java classes. But you still report to the customers that we have vulnerable framework with our application, nothing we can do, right? For now. That's why a lot of this, your first slide where there are 80% of vulnerability management, if your commitment as a business to fix all the vulnerabilities, third party included, in your product is one thing, fix all vulnerabilities of your application in terms of the logic and flow. It's different approach, right?
It is a different approach, but again, it comes down to different layers. But yes.
What is more like your logic or third party vulnerabilities?
Frank and Petra have raised their hands, but I wanna.
Yeah, maybe just on the point that Vex was created exactly for the justification for the client to say, hey, this is stuff that is actually not exploitable, and to add the context to the client. That's why if we serve Scrum to a client, they would say, hey, we have tons of vulnerable things, but you can add the context of reachability, threat are not exploitable, these are the major threat, these are non-threat. So you can add that context.
This is sensitive way to respond, but not all clients like that response. For them, it's just there's the
we've seen more and more clients providing that context, and regulators starting to accept the fact that not everything is fixable and reachable, so the market is slowly changing. And also with the EPSS group, I don't know if you're aware of it, we are pushing a lot of regulation starting from PCI that is moving towards a race-based approach, not a CVSS-based approach, and more.
For the PCI, yes, but the CRI that's coming next year, or we will could be.
It's still based on SPOM and Vex.
It's all about risk assessments, like 100% behind what Mitchell said.
So, all right, folks, unfortunately, we're running out of time here. Because of the next session, they wanted to give everybody a chance to get over to the next session, which is going to be in the Beverly showroom. That's going to be on data-driven threat modeling insights from the state of threat modeling report. Thank you very much, Amir. Appreciate that.
Thank you.